Chapter 27. Cosmic Coincidence. As Xicadian and Siwu entered the administrator's office, Simanthia paused briefly from her work, gesturing warmly towards a cluster of chairs at the far end of the room. Upon locating the star she was apparently seeking, she proceeded to expand the image, revealing its major planetary bodies, one of which just so happened to be Quaverly. After locking the image into a static frame, Simanthia made her way languidly through the iridescent hologram, causing it to temporarily distort and reshape all around her. Taking a seat opposite her guests, she travelled a curious gaze over the general and the Cybot before smiling disarmingly.
Welcome to the head operating theatre of the International Astrometrics Orbital Array. It's always a great honour to host representatives from a nest as historically prestigious as that of Nest Xitalia.
The administrator maintained a distinct air of impenetrable unflappability, and Xicadian could not help but wonder what she truly thought of Queen Xitalia. Did she admire or revile her? It shouldn't make any difference, of course, but the fact remained. Even elders electial queens would not go out of their way to cross Simanthia. No, Xicadian seriously doubted she was much of a fan, as Xitalia's reputation did rather precede her. The young general caught himself wriggling nervously on his chair table, and quickly sought to re-establish his composure. Dressed as she was, in a nondescript matte black nanosuit, the simple fact she had chosen to furnish herself with the title of administrator, when she could so easily have chosen a far more grandiose name, spoke volumes as to what she was truly about, which apparently did not include self-aggrandizement. As legend had it, Simanthia showed up at the office one day looking 100 years younger than she had the day before. Despite this rather startling fact, everyone had continued to simply call her the administrator, as if she was exactly the same arachnid that she had always been. So, a lineage of Ximatiri clones then. It seemed that, rather than choose a potentially less capable leader to succeed her, the IAOA governing body had, in all their wisdom, instead decided to simply clone her in perpetuity. Almost certainly, there was already a much younger version of Simanthia being trained by her older self as her next successor. While under normal circumstances this would have been a clear violation of the Ximagentia Accords, the unique circumstances of her position meant she had somehow gained official exemption. All things considered, it had probably been quite a wise decision, as Simanthia had proven herself to be, above all else, completely incorruptible. Exactly where she came from remained a closely guarded secret, but it was widely believed she originally belonged to the very first nest to suffer compulsory disillusionment. Whether or not the currently incumbent Simanthia knew the truth of her own heritage was not known, but it was very hard to imagine any arachnid would ever be stupid enough to ask. However, what was known was that the IAOA had always been conceived of as a global public service in every sense of the word, and it did not pick favourites. It simply administered the rules and then helped find the planets. Regardless, Ximanthia's noted talents as an astrophysicist and cosmologist was something that made Ximodian 111 very excited, now that the orbital array was on the eve of becoming his new home.
Now then, before we begin, I do trust you have found your new operations centre to be of adequate design and functionality, yes?
Zymanthia flashed an acknowledging glance at the Zybot, as if to signal the question was open to the both of them. However, Ziwu apparently chose to remain implacably silent.
It is still very early days, Administrator, but I think I'm speaking for everyone when I say that we are all feeling somewhat overwhelmed by the sheer breadth and depth of the capabilities your team has so generously made available to us.
Zimodian immediately felt his reply held just a touch too much enthusiasm to be regarded as entirely authentic. He somewhat somberly concluded diplomacy was a skill that could not solely be mastered through a textbook, and he was, perhaps, just a little bit out of his depth. Or maybe even a lot.
Well, no doubt it will take some time to settle in and figure out the method to the madness. I hope it goes without saying I operate an open-door policy, so please just know that I am available day or night to adjudicate and resolve any outstanding issues that might arise.
Zymanthia then very pointedly added,
Now, not wishing to come across as too heavy-handed, please understand that I take fairness and equality very seriously. I very much hope that this entirely non-negotiable character flaw will not become a source of any future confusion or conflicts of interest between the ongoing equitable operation of this array, and shall we say, the rather unique arrangement nest Xitalia has rather unfairly managed to procure for itself.
The administrator's not-so-subtle pivot in tone was impossible to miss. However, under the circumstances, Zimodian still felt pleasantly surprised by the unexpectedly cordial reception they had so far received. Perhaps, very uncharacteristically, Queen Xitalia had not opted for time credits by licensing her new stasis technology to any nests willing and able to pay for it. She had instead chosen to negotiate an operational presence on the orbital array, such that Nest Xitalia now enjoyed privileged access to the very best stellar cartography currently had to offer. It all boiled down to blatant favoritism, and was no doubt perceived as the complete antithesis of the fairness and equality Zymanthia had been espousing just moments prior. But of course, Xitalia had understood all too well that the success of Dr. Xicatica's revived research paper had put her in a uniquely powerful bargaining position. By agreeing to release the enhanced stasis technology globally, the IAOA could now start flexing its own technological muscle and go looking for potentially habitable exoplanets that sat well outside the current 200 light-year boundary. In point of fact, it was not only stellar cartography being held back by the limits of the existing stasis technology. The latest generation AM engines were now capable of at least partially replenishing their fuel supply by converting virtual particles into the real thing, along with their antimatter counterparts. This cosmic alchemy was possible once the starship had hit relativistic speeds of 40% the speed of light, something the newest generation of engines were perfectly capable of achieving. With stagnant stasis tech historically being the primary limiting factor, finding habitable planets colony ships could travel to with its cargo still alive was fast reaching the point of crisis. The simple fact of the matter was, many smaller, time-poor nests were now rapidly approaching compulsory disillusionment, and as a result, the political stability on Xicadia was now being increasingly threatened. Very unfortunately, the most obvious solution to this problem, sending additional nests to one of the existing extrasolar colonies, was never going to fly. With even the smaller nests being around 1 billion arachnids, and with the ability to almost triple that number within 1 solar year, the perceived risk of overwhelming one of the new colonies by allowing multiple nest migrations was both a political and cultural non-starter. For time immemorial, it was every nest for itself, and when it came to the hunt for a new exoplanet to call your own, this was certainly no exception. The bottom line was, in greater Xicadian society, possession was 9/9 of the law. Somewhat inevitably then, compulsory disillusionment was now beginning to happen with increasing regularity, and was always reported on the extrasolar newscasts as a frightening foretelling of the potential fate that lay in wait for many of the less wealthy nests. The growing consensus, much to Queen Xitalia's satisfaction, was this left the continued advancement of technology as their only realistic hope for the future. The problem, of course, was, up until now anyway, 400 years was the recommended stasis limit, and even that was pushing your luck. The reality was, it simply was not practical to revive 1 billion plus arachnids mid-journey to give their bodies sufficient time to repair. So, at a cruising speed of 25% the speed of light, this gave you a range of approximately 100 light years. While the latest AM engines could do substantially better than that, this was still the practical upper boundary for much of the existing fleet. Indeed, while intermittent stasis revival was an entirely legitimate strategy when dealing with a small number of passengers, it was a complete non-starter on a giant colony ship mid-journey. Just bringing a single arachnid out of stasis was itself a very energy-intensive process, and once revived, it would need all the things any metabolically active arachnoid would need, starting with, rather obviously, a breathable atmosphere within a survivable climate. But colony ships worked precisely because they did not need to maintain such conditions for the bulk of their voyage. It was therefore a great triumph indeed when Jiwu and Dr. Xicadian finally released their updated paper, which the biotech and engineering teams wasted no time turning into practical reality. Xitalia, seizing the moment, negotiated a deal for her nest to set up a specialist team at the IAOA's Head Operations Theatre, in exchange for open access to the new stasis technology. The command centre for this array, which was itself located on Xicades, was where both Jiwu and Ximodian now found themselves stationed. While for Jiwu this was a strictly temporary assignment, for Ximodian 111 it would be a semi-permanent posting, as his primary role was to now try and find a Grade 1 habitable planet.
I give you my solemn word, Samanthia.
The young Xicadian general blurted out with a performative air of enthusiasm.
We are fully committed to operating within the rules and regulations as detailed in the official charter. Please be assured that Queen Xitalia is acutely aware of the sensitive nature relating to our arrangement, and the last thing she would ever want is to create any further political tension.
Xanthia peered searchingly into the face of the young Xicadian general, akin to a doctor moments before wielding their scalpel. Why exactly is he trying so hard? The administrator thought to herself curiously. Was he just another silver-tongued bureaucrat attempting to make a name for himself? Or was he exactly what he appeared to be? A naive Xicadian general with only a very limited comprehension of how his own queen was playing him like a pawn. Well, assuming it was the latter, with no less than 9 brains in his arsenal, she sincerely hoped he was a fast learner.
Yes, well, I have always liked honesty in a Xicadian, especially when it comes from one as uniquely endowed as yourself. But do you know what else I like? A frank exchange of views. The fact of the matter is, I can't say I am particularly happy with this arrangement, as it smacks of inequitable favouritism. However, the majority on the advisory committee have spoken, and I have to concede, your nest's breakthrough in stasis longevity is the very definition of a disruptive technology. If it takes a compromise in ethics to get it out into the public domain, which is exactly where it belonged in the first place, who am I to stand in the way of such a significant technological breakthrough?
Xanthia paused for a brief moment, as if considering her next words very carefully.
Your queen has sought to improve your odds of finding a favourable homeworld, and I really can't fault her for that. But make no mistake about it, Ximodian, you still face truly formidable odds. Although your famous namesake long ago predicted an abundance of habitable celestial bodies, we have to date only discovered 5 verified examples with most, such as this latest find on the holographic, barely worthy of the label. The painful reality is the pickings have been vastly thinner than we once might have hoped. I cannot help but suspect your queen will come to greatly regret her decision. After all, the number of time credits she could have harvested with this latest technological leap would surely have been considerable, and that's putting it mildly. A surprising gamble to take for an elder Xillectile queen, I'm sure you would agree.
The young general quickly sought to reassure the administrator. The decision his queen had made had been a carefully considered one.
Queen Xitalia, in all her wisdom and humility, understands even her nest will run out of time eventually. I think you know better than anyone the conditions on Xicadia are not exactly getting any better. One day we will have to leave, and the queen would much prefer it is on her own terms. If she is guilty of anything at all, then it is simply of having very high standards and aspirations. Nest Xitalia has always been the gold standard for what a Xicadian nest should be, and we have every intention for that to continue to hold true when we eventually migrate off-world.
Being very careful to stay on script, the general continued to deliver his talking points.
However, I can assure you, Administrator, this new arrangement is not primarily about what is best for my queen. In fact, nothing could be further from the truth. Yes, the deal we have struck with the IAOA improves our chances of locating a homeworld worthy of Nest Xitalia's stature. But far more importantly, it also ensures our new stasis technology is made available to every Xicadian nest across the face of the planet. I think we can both agree this is something that the great Queen Ximogentia, herself a historical friend and ally of Queen Xitalia, would surely very much have approved of.
Xanthia nodded her head up and down knowingly.
Well, what a truly fascinating insight into the psychology of your queen. Now, I hope you will take no insult in what I'm about to say next, but I would not have credited Xitalia with such thoughtful altruism based on her less than stellar track record. Perhaps she has done the unthinkable, and finally learnt to receive wise counsel from those who would seek to advise her against the folly of her own vanity. Yes, or maybe not. Perhaps this new stasis tech was the only possible way she could ever have hoped to negotiate a presence here on the orbital, and thus made the supreme sacrifice not out of altruism, but out of pure, self-interested greed. Given everything we already know about your queen, which no doubt represents only the tip of the iceberg, which hypothetical do you think sounds the more plausible? Please do share your thoughts, General. I am genuinely interested to hear your unbiased opinion on the matter.
Uh-oh. I do believe Ximodian might have bitten off more than he can chew. The Zybot thought to itself with genuine concern, now hastily injecting itself into the conversation.
With all due respect, Administrator, whatever certain critics may try to say about my queen, she has never been anyone else's fool, and is always quick to acknowledge the sound of wisdom when offered. Of course, if you have any actual evidence to the contrary, we would be only too happy to hear of it, so please do feel free to elucidate. I mean to say, understanding the exact source of these malicious rumours would be very helpful.
Ximanthia's eyes went wide with surprise. Just look at the size of the egg sacs on this one, the administrator thought to herself with a mild sense of bemusement.
I must confess, I was genuinely curious as to when you would choose to join the conversation, Shi-Wu. After all, your reputation does rather precede you.
Speaking of well-storied reputations, I can only hope I have made an adequate first impression, Madame Administrator.
The shy bot replied drolly.
A sense of humour. I like it. But rest assured, Shi-Wu, I've never sentenced anyone to a punishment they didn't have coming. Now then, unless I'm very much mistaken, I believe that I've made my position adequately clear, so let's get down to business, shall we?
Please, go ahead and regale us with your authoritarian wisdom, Ximanthiya. I'm sure you're very accustomed to a captive audience.
Shi-Wu?
Ximodian admonished the Zybot angrily, but the administrator immediately raised her hands in a placating gesture.
No, it's perfectly all right, I assure you, General. If truth be told, I rather enjoy this Z-bot's uniquely forthright style of communication. It's actually rather refreshing, I think is the word I'm looking for here.
Ximodian shot the Zybot a baleful glare before returning his gaze back to the administrator.
Nonetheless, I apologize unreservedly for Ji-Wu's entirely inappropriate conduct. Rest assured, Madam Administrator, it will no longer speak unless it is spoken to for the remaining duration of this meeting.
The administrator offered a nonchalant shrug.
Well, if you say so, General. Now, where was I exactly? Ah, yes. As previously discussed, we have agreed to give you unaudited access of up to 5% of the array's total available unused processing capacity. How you and your team decide to spend those resources is entirely up to you. However, unused capacity does not accrue and is on a strictly use it or lose it basis. Deep scans still need to come through official channels with absolutely no queue jumping allowed. Let me be crystal clear. Your formal deep scan requests will be treated just like those of any other nests. If you are found breaking this rule, or any other rule of equivalent or higher severity, your entire team's security access will be summarily revoked, and your staff will be given exactly 1 solar day to vacate the premises. If you have not done so by then, any remaining members will be forcibly taken into custody and shipped back to Xicadia under armed guard.
Ximanthiya gave her guests a challenging glare.
Now then, Shi-Wu's gag order notwithstanding, I am more than certain it has recorded every detail of this conversation and will be reporting it back to Queen Zitalia forthwith. As it turns out, this is actually a very good thing, because there is no room for any misunderstanding here. The IAOA is not under the authority of any super nest, much less any individual queen, even one with a long history of throwing her weight around in order to get what she wants. No, I'm very much afraid that isn't going to fly here. Your queen needs to understand that vitally important fact for the sake of her nest's continued and future well-being. Understand this. Celestial queens don't get to outlive me, not all of me anyway.
The administrator straightened her posture performatively and stared at the shybot as if she was sitting in front of a holographic recorder.
The IAOA has a range of punitive actions it can bring to bear against any nest it deems to have violated its sovereign rights, as enshrined by the Xicadian Accords. Accords, I might hasten to add, that Xitalia seems to suggest she has some amount of historical loyalty towards. These actions can range from trivial time credit penalties all the way up to premature compulsory disillusionment if the crime is deemed sufficiently serious. Fortunately, we have never yet needed to take such drastic action, but I am all too well aware of Nest Xitalia's volatile reputation. I will be keeping a very close eye on your new operation, and I implore you, Queen Xitalia, no funny business, or you will quickly learn to regret it.
A brief moment of pregnant silence ensued before the General hastily launched into damage control.
Madam Administrator, if I may be so bold, as it turns out, Queen Xitalia did in fact warn me you might be less than entirely happy with this admittedly somewhat unorthodox arrangement. So as a gesture of good faith then, we would like to present you with a small gift in order to demonstrate the full extent of our appreciation towards the gracious hospitality you have so far afforded us today. May I?
Ximodian tilted his head quizzically towards the office door. Ximanthia made a small but elaborate gesture with one of her hands, causing the door to iris open. A few moments later, two Ximatiri technicians carried in a large, opaque silver box, and then, with a considerable amount of deference, carefully placed it to the floor. The General, now feeling somewhat more confident he was about to deliver a winning hand, continued unabated with his pre-rehearsed spiel.
Madam Administrator, it is my great pleasure to present to you a mesh quantum brain direct from our Xicadian shipyard, the very same technology that drives Xi-Wu, the first ever fully certified sentient Xibot ever created. This is a genuine no-strings-attached gift, and we will of course provide full technical assistance with regards to the installation and integration of this quantum neural processor. I'm sure I hardly need to tell you of the significant performance and capacity benefits this revolutionary unit will provide to your overall operational capabilities.
Ximanthia's eyes went narrow. The General was immediately consumed with a deep sense of impending doom.
No strings, you say? Well, that's a great relief. Then again, who needs strings with optics as bad as this? Of course, I'm sure that particular point had not slipped past your own queen, even if the same cannot apparently be said of you.
Ximodian's mandibles began to twitch frantically as he realized his winning play had somehow catastrophically backfired.
This really is all just one great big surprise to you, isn't it, General? Nevertheless, I don't think we will be accepting this most generous bribe from your queen. After all, I know how long these things take to manufacture. What is it? Half a solar cycle, and for just a single unit.
Ximanthia gave Ximodian a sardonic smile, almost as if she was just about to start in on a second helping of her favourite meal.
However, fear not, my young General. All may not be lost. Perhaps there might yet be a way to solve this awkward little dilemma of ours by exploiting the IAOA's extensive legal right of punitive seizure.
The Administrator returned a performative gaze to the Zybot.
Let me be crystal clear, Xitalia. You are not gifting this MQB, we are requisitioning it. And to further drive home the point, we will also be securing a second unit to be shipped from your manufacturing plant just as soon as it rolls off the production line. This will of course be a completely confidential acquisition. I will be extremely disappointed if any false rumours in relation to this particular seizure should mysteriously start popping up on the extrasolar newscasts.
Ximanthia gave Ximodian a shit-eating grin.
There will be no anonymous and unsubstantiated claims of gifts being proffered to the IAOA. Do you understand, General?
Ximodian winced visibly.
There will be absolutely no mention of any gifts. You have my solemn word, Administrator. And I alone take full responsibility for this very embarrassing failure in diplomatic protocol. Please understand, there was never any deceptive intent, as naively ill-conceived as this gift has clearly turned out to be. However, as to the issue of a second MQB,
The general cleared his throat awkwardly before continuing.
we, Nest Xitalia that is, recently fell victim to an act of grand larceny. A valuable fifth-generation Gbot prototype was brazenly stolen from our own research labs, meaning we suffered a loss of not less than 7 MQBs all in one fell sweep. Unless we recover the unit, we will be desperately undersupplied for the next few years, although we do anticipate a significant ramp-up in production with the introduction of our next iterative model.
Ximanthiya glared at the general disapprovingly. Ximodian suddenly found it very difficult to hold his voice steady.
We could, however, offer you a generous supply of our classical mesh brain matrix artificial minds, which we currently still have in bountiful supply. I can order a shipment to be delivered with immediate dispatch the moment this meeting is over. Just give me the word, Administrator, and I will make it happen as a matter of utmost urgency and importance.
Ximanthiya gave the general a smile that did not touch her eyes.
Such a generous offer to place on the table, but no, I really don't think so. I much prefer the idea of acquiring a second MQB, just as soon as it rolls off your apparently beleaguered production line. After all, it's always good to have a backup, I'm sure you would agree. Nevertheless, I do sincerely hope that you manage to track down the thieves. Speaking of which, may I very gently suggest that you might also want to review your security in light of such a significant loss. I would of course be more than happy to provide a team of consultants if you feel that might assist you in improving your evidently deficient security regime. Oh, and, by the way, your technicians can leave that container exactly where it is. If we require any technical assistance with regards to installation, then rest assured we won't hesitate to reach out. However, I strongly suspect this most remarkable 5th-gen she-bot of yours, She-Wu, will be all the help we are likely to ever need.
Ximanthiya glared coldly at the two Ximatiri technicians, who in turn both looked to their general pleadingly. After offering them a resigned gesture, they both quickly scuttled their way out of the office. The administrator now rose from her chair table, with a warm smile returning to her face.
I really can't begin to express just how happy I am to have your team on board. Like I said, don't hesitate to come and see me if you encounter any problems, no matter how big or small. And of course, I will be watching your progress with a great deal of interest. After all, nothing would delight me more than to be proven wrong.
Ximanthiya extended her middle forelimb out towards Ximodian, but Ji-Wu speedily intercepted it with one of its own.
It's been a truly confounding education to watch you in action, Administrator. No doubt stellar cartography would not be what it is today without your imperturbably pugnacious style of leadership.
Ximanthiya's expression flashed surprise, but quickly settled back into one of supreme composure.
I'll take that as a compliment, Shi-Wu, but we must schedule a meeting, you and I, to discuss the installation of this fancy new MQB. Now, please don't take this the wrong way, but I have to admit you are not at all what I expected. I genuinely hope I get the chance to get to know you a little better before you return to Xicadia. Perhaps I'm just arachnopomorphizing, but I can't quite help escape the feeling you may well turn out to be one of a kind.
The meeting was now officially over, but the administrator paused briefly as her expression became deeply troubled.
I want you all to know Zithuzela's cold-blooded murder was a truly terrible crime, not just for Nest Xitalia, but for the whole of Xicadia as well. Trust me when I say his reputation extended far beyond his indisputable brilliance. His vision and courage to pursue ecological and cultural change was the very exemplar of the kind of novel, innovative thinking Xicadia has not seen since the Sihari Revolution. Believe me when I say I grieve right alongside your queen, and may the gods of Exynos Prime deliver swift justice to his killer.
Ximodian's eyes began to glaze over at the sheer magnitude of unexplored stars laid out all around him. For no other reason than the pure, visceral joy of it, the general allowed the holographic starfield to condense into a volume of 500 light-years, stellar cartography's new upper limit in light of the enhanced stasis technology. After a few brief moments of pure, unadulterated bliss, as he swam aimlessly in a literal ocean of stars, Ximodian reluctantly dialed back the depth of field to the much more manageable volume of 250 light-years. The reality was, despite the greater range afforded by a practically limitless stasis technology, closer, all things considered, would always be better, with distance being directly proportional to cost and risk. While it was certainly true enough to say starship fleets did not cost any individual nest directly, inasmuch as the Xicadian Interstellar Manufacturing Initiative, or XIMI for short, built fleets without affiliation to any individual nest, XIMI was far from an inexhaustible resource. It was therefore XIMI's official policy. Nests still limit themselves to searches within a 250 light-year boundary until further efficiency gains had been achieved across the entire spectrum of supporting technologies. Perhaps not so surprisingly, though, the actual reality of the situation was a good deal more complex. Accessing resources direct from Xicadia to support the construction of colony starships was itself having a detrimental impact on the fragile Xicadian ecosystem. This was a dirty little secret that had mostly been kept out of the public eye, but which, in their rush to leave the planet, was, ironically enough, also accelerating its demise. A fact that troubled Ximodian greatly, as his knowledge of the geopolitical landscape continued to broaden its horizons. Senior Celestial queens, eager to maintain the peace, were now actively lying to their subjects. The ugly truth was, Ximodian could no longer deny his own complicity as a privileged Xihari elite. To be fair, longer-term sustainable solutions were being actively sought by moving as much heavy industry to Euclides as was realistically possible, along with a ramp-up in asteroid mining, in order to secure crucial raw materials. But these initiatives took time, and XIMI was now in the position of having to play catch-up, with stasis technology no longer the limiting factor. With a dismissive shake of his head, Ximodian proceeded to alter the holographic's lower boundary to 200 light-years, such that he was now surrounded by a 50 light-year donut of stars. This was the new promised land, a volume of space that had previously not yet been comprehensively scoured, but which lay in a zone officially approved by both the International Astrometrics Orbital Array and XIMI alike. So it was, Ximodian now found himself focusing his full attention on this new cosmic sweet spot. The star field, which had already been significantly reduced in density via its altered lower boundary, was now further thinned out as he limited the eligible star types to F, G, and K. This was, of course, where the laws of physics dictated they were far more likely to find a planet of similar profile to that of his current point of origin, Xanos Prime. Very helpfully, other competing nests had only just started pointing their own vastly inferior local observatories towards this more distant region of space, which meant there was currently still an overabundance of unexamined eligible stars. That said, it would certainly not take long before all the preferred star types had been exhaustively surveyed. That would leave only two other possible options. Turn your focus back to the vastly more common red dwarfs, or go against Zimi's current recommendation and start searching further afield. While there would be pros and cons to either approach, it was still much too early for the general to worry about such an eventuality just yet. Nest Xitalia now enjoyed privileged access to the very best astrometrics had to offer, and there were plenty of possible candidates within the current volume of space which might yet yield their new homeworld. Indeed, it hadn't taken particularly long for Ximodian and his small team of specialists to get themselves up to speed with the operational interface that drove the stellar cartography toolset, and the general had so far done a very good job of keeping his mandibles clean, much to the appreciation of the administrator. Ziwu bleakly meandered its way into the new operations centre, casting a resentful eye towards the general. It had somehow managed to justify sticking around for a little bit longer by aiding Ximanthia's technicians with the installation of the MQB. However, with that work now all but complete, it had essentially run out of excuses to avoid returning to Xycadia, a thought that filled the Zybot with a sense of existential dread. From the moment it had set foot on the orbital array, it had been all but overwhelmed with a powerful sense of purpose. This was a place worthy of its talents, a place where it could truly make a difference. Providing mindless escort services to Queen Xitalia, given it was no longer compelled to protect her, made the entire charade worse than a complete waste of time. The problem was, it couldn't exactly just tell her that. Yet the reality was, this was where it was truly meant to be. It was a feeling that lived somewhere deep down inside, almost as if it were an intrinsic part of its being. Noting the general appeared thoroughly preoccupied with his work, Shiwu somewhat tentatively connected to a terminal and then engaged its own holographic starfield. It was mildly relieved to discover it still had access to the orbital's network, although, unfortunately, that was not something likely to last very much longer. While the Shybot glumly contemplated its inevitable departure from Aclades, it decided to take a nostalgic last look at Estella, the star it had spent several of its formative years piloting Ness Silandria's colony towards. As things turned out, its orbiting eyeball planet, Quaverly, had a nominal habitability grading of 4, something which would, no doubt, have made Ximodian 110 relatively happy. While grade 4 wasn't exactly a picnic, it was still very much doable. Well, sort of, anyway. In less politically correct terms, a grade 4 habitability rating meant a Xicadian arachnid would need to endure several minutes of naked exposure to its surface level atmosphere before dying horribly. Even then, Shiwu thought to itself somewhat pragmatically, it could probably still be revived, as long as you did not wait too long before trying to do so. No, it had to admit to itself. For a carbon-based life form, they were rather hardy and robust little creatures, especially after their bio-augments. Even so, it was hardly an ideal situation, and Xylandria really had all her work cut out for her, if she expected her colony to survive, much less thrive. For whatever the reason, Queen Xylandria's colony had been weighing very heavily on its mind. Who knows? Perhaps it felt some lingering sense of responsibility with regards to her rather bleak prospects. Shiwu now found itself idly contemplating the possibility of second-generation colonization. If, by some miracle, Queen Xylandria managed to establish a stable colony, then surely one day she might seriously consider treating Quaverly as nothing more than a temporary staging point. A staging point from which she could then find a more hospitable planet to call home. The problem with that particular theory, of course, was her nest would be in no position to resource a second journey for at least the next several millennia, assuming it managed to survive that long. Yet the cold, hard reality was, Xylandria's nest was utterly doomed if she did not try to find another home planet, and sooner rather than later. No, it was only a matter of time before Xitalia revealed the ironclad evidence against Queen Xylandria, and as a result, her nest would be legally required to undergo compulsory disillusionment, despite its off-world status. Quaverly would then be awarded to another eligible nest, assuming, of course, Xitalia did not claim it for herself. In reality, though, things were unlikely to play out quite so neatly. This would probably be Xicadia's first ever legitimate example of an interstellar war. Although Xylandria would ultimately lose, she would likely take a scorched earth approach to the conflict, deciding that if she couldn't have Quaverly, then no one else could either. No doubt Xitalia would offer very generous terms to try and secure the planet's infrastructure. However, very understandably, Xylandria would not believe a word of it. So an intractable and mutually destructive war seemed all but a foregone conclusion. Noting Ximodian still appeared to be deeply immersed in his work, the Xybot decided, perhaps somewhat on a whim, to carry out its own hyper-accelerated search for Xylandria's hypothesized second home. Who knows, if by some miracle it actually found something useful, it might yet be in a position to avert an interstellar war. The Xybot started by selecting a stellar as its new point of origin. It then generated a revised list of eligible stars up to 250 light-years distant, excluding all intersecting matches from its original volume. As expected, the resulting subset of qualifying stars was relatively small. Nonetheless, in order to narrow the field down even further, it decided to exclude all stars greater or less than 5% the volume and mass of Xanos Prime. Had such discerning selection criteria yielded no results, Shiwu might have been inclined to call it quits right then and there, and instead face the grim reality of its imminent return to Nest Xitalia. However, to its very pleasant surprise, the revised search came back with a single eligible candidate, nearly 250 light-years distant from a stellar. Certainly somewhat further away than it might have preferred, but nonetheless that was all the excuse it needed to delay its departure for just that little bit longer. The next step then was to go looking for orbiting bodies. Perturbations, obviously, but even better, clean transits would be especially nice. With a growing sense of trepidation, Shiwu ordered the highest fidelity scan it could get away with without requiring formal authorization. Now all it had to do was wait for the results to come in. Somewhat reluctantly then, it shut down its holographic terminal and retired for the rest of the day, feeling uncomfortably like some kind of delinquent spiderling about to sneak its way onto a sanctuary. Shiwu cancelled its reservation with the space elevator's courtesy shuttle. Knowing that this would trigger an alert with the Queen, the She-bot wasted no time dialing Xitalia's private number and now waited pensively for her to answer its call.
My Queen, some minor issues have just come to light regarding the MQB's integration into one or two of the smaller and less used orbital subsystems. Given the recent tensions between Nest Xitalia and the administrator, I thought the most politically expedient thing to do was to make an unsolicited offer of my technical expertise to help resolve these last remaining issues. I thought it might, help calm the waters, so to speak.
The Xybot now braced itself in preparation for what it strongly suspected would be a less than cordial response.
You really are starting to make a habit out of disappointing me, aren't you, Shiwu? I have already delayed my constitutional walk twice in a row now in order to accommodate your suspiciously poor time management skills.
Xitalia's holographic image radiated an almost palpable field of disapproval.
Very well, Shiwu. You have exactly one extra solar day and not a second more. I will not be delaying my forest walk for a third time in a row, and I fully expect you to be at my side when I take it. Consider yourself to be on a very short leash, so don't try testing my patience again.
The Queen ended the call abruptly, and Shiwu was consumed with the most unsettling feeling. It had somehow dodged a bullet, but could still be hit with a ricochet. It was vaguely possible Xitalia might think to contact the administrator directly to challenge the request, which would quickly expose the lie. However, Xerex, who had proposed the strategy in the first place, had assured Shiwu this was an absurdly remote possibility. According to the spybot, the Queen's desire not to offend the administrator would be a much more powerful force than her lingering suspicion it might have been lying. Xitalia, Xerix had tried to argue, was all about risk versus reward. If the scales didn't balance, then she simply wouldn't take the chance. After many hours of restless fretting, Shiwu eventually managed to fall into a fitful sleep. Like it so often did since being reborn, it dreamed of mysterious, faraway worlds. On this particular occasion, it dreamed of creatures made of spongy, cylindrical tubes. One of the creatures, balanced in an unlikely vertical position, tottered its way awkwardly towards it, and then began to speak through a small, warbling hole. The sound it made was so beautiful, it was hard to concentrate on what it was trying to say. "You will know pain," it said, with its gorgeously sonorous voice. The creature then began to laugh like thunder rolling through the mountains. It was as if all the hate in the universe had been crushed into a single point. Shiwu woke up with a start. Feeling somewhat shaken by its disturbingly vivid dream, the Shibot made its way back to the operations centre early the following day. As things turned out, it did not take long for Shiwu's nightmare to be completely banished from its mind. Not only did this new solar system contain a planet of significant interest, its orbital plane was such that it crossed directly in front of its local star, relative to the astrometric array's line of sight. A near-perfect transit, then, the Shibot thought to itself, with a growing sense of disbelief. It was as if all the stars had magically deemed fit to metaphorically align.
Please don't take this the wrong way, Jiwu. But why in Xicadia are you still here? I could have sworn that I had disabled all your access rights last night. I guess it must have slipped my mind. Regardless, you do understand you are no longer authorized to access the orbital array, right?
Ximodian 111, still rubbing sleep out of his eyes, now stood directly behind the Zybot, a mildly accusatory expression on his face. To the Zybot's considerable chagrin, it had evidently been so deeply engrossed in its work, it had somehow completely failed to notice the General's approach, despite its stunning array of sensory apparatus.
Technically speaking, until my access rights have been revoked, I am fully entitled to continue with my work. Speaking of which, you might be rather glad you neglected to fulfill your administrative duties.
The Shybot retorted belligerently, trying its level best to mask the surprise it felt at having been successfully crept up upon.
Really? And how do you figure that exactly?
The General said with a distinct air of apathetic disinterest as he meandered his way over to a vending machine.
Well, assuming you still remember the reason we are actually here, I seem to have quite literally stumbled upon a candidate planet, which according to the preliminary scan, orbits a star of nearly identical metrics to that of Exynos Prime. But it gets a whole lot better than that, I assure you.
You don't say,
Ximodian said, somewhat distractedly, as he began to suck loudly on his jellied bloodworm.
I absolutely do say. The planet's estimated mass and volume gives it an almost identical orbital period to that of Xicadia's, so not just a nearly identical star, but at first glance anyway, a nearly identical planet as well.
The General, resisting the temptation to start licking his empty bowl, stared intensely at the data currently being presented by the holographic projection. He noted with fleeting curiosity Shiwu had encrypted the image such that it would look like meaningless noise to anyone else but them. What exactly had gotten into this Shybot?
I seem to have inadvertently tripped over Xicadia's twin. Obviously, there is still a lot of analysis to be done, but so far at least, this planet ticks all the boxes, and more so in fact than any other planet that has ever been discovered before.
Zimodian, now very much awake, tried to find something in the preliminary data that would rule it out of consideration. Tried, but so far anyway, completely failed to do so. Except that is for one rather blazingly obvious fact.
But it's over 300 light-years distant. What in Xicadia possessed you to look that far out?
Is that really all you have to say for yourself?
The Shybot replied hotly, immediately surprised with the emotively charged nature of its own response. Zimodian lifted his forelimbs up in a placating gesture.
Now, Shiwu. Let's try not to get too far ahead of ourselves just yet. Without a deep spectral scan, we cannot be absolutely certain about what we are dealing with here.
The general placed a pacifying hand onto Shiwu's carapace.
All I'm trying to say here is it is still far too early to report back our findings to the Queen. But I will of course go ahead and lodge an official request for a deep spectral scan. In the meantime, I think we should just sit tight. A premature announcement like this will produce a tremendous amount of disappointment if it turns out to be nothing, which, knowing our luck, it probably will.
I think you mean my findings, Zimodian,
Shiwu replied tersely.
A deep spectral scan will almost certainly serve only to confirm what we both already know. In any event, I am more than capable of lodging the request all by myself when I am good and ready to do so, but as it so happens there is something else that I would very much like to check first.
The young Zihari general looked abashed.
You are absolutely right, of course. Clearly I misspoke, and for that I can only apologize profusely. It's your find, not mine. So go ahead and lodge the request whenever you're good and ready. And of course, how fitting that you will be the one who gets to name it, star and planet alike.
Shiwu immediately felt profoundly ashamed for being so needlessly combative towards one of its very few friends. No, Xicadian 111 could not have been any more different from his predecessor. Quick to forgive and slow to anger, those two laudable attributes set amongst a litany of others. How tragic then, the Xybot thought to itself sadly. His long list of admirable qualities all but condemned him to become a massive disappointment to the Queen. I have put the general in terrible danger, and should not have allowed him to stumble on my discovery. It muttered to itself silently, before wondering with a sense of perplexed shock exactly where that thought had come from.
I apologize unreservedly, Zimodian. I should not have snapped at you in the way that I did. I hope you can find it in your hearts to forgive me. Now I know this may sound utterly absurd, but I would very much like to check for techno-signatures before we allow anyone else to learn of this discovery.
The general's mandibles began to gape wordlessly.
Seriously? Techno-signatures? I mean to say, we've not yet seen a single shred of evidence for intelligent life anywhere else in the cosmic web. Surely then you don't actually expect to find anything. The odds must be so vanishingly small, it is very hard to know why you would even bother. Not without first performing a deep spectral scan anyway.
Shiwu was overcome with a wave of frustrated confusion. What exactly was it supposed to tell him? That it wanted to check because it had a bad dream? A premonition? When it came right down to it, it had not the slightest clue as to why it thought checking for techno-signatures felt like such a necessary thing to do, when in reality Zimodian was almost certainly right. The odds, whatever they actually were guaranteed to be so infinitesimally small, it simply made no sense to spend the time checking? It made no sense, and yet it felt so vitally important.
Allow me to explain myself, Ximodian. I want to test a new dynamically generative analytical algorithm. If my hypothesis turns out to be correct, then it should be capable of detecting artificial signals within what would otherwise be regarded as an ocean of meaningless noise. If my search algorithm acquires a match, which we both know will almost certainly be false, then it will prove that my code still needs some more work. The point being, the suite of astrometric data being collected from this planet is a singularly unique opportunity too good to say no to.
It was a bold-faced lie, of course, its second one for the day, and one that would fail miserably if put under closer scrutiny. But it had to come up with something, because the actual truth was still too much of a disturbing mystery, even to itself, especially to itself.
All right, Jiwoo, if you say so. But just out of curiosity, exactly how long do you figure you will actually need to test this algorithm of yours out?
Ximodian sounded for all the world like an arachnid that knew something was off, but trusted its friend so completely it simply could not entertain the possibility he was actually being lied to.
Very difficult to say, General, given its generative nature, but hopefully it should not take too long. Hopefully.
The reality was, Jiwoo had not the slightest clue of how much time it might need. It could always get lucky, of course, but in order to perform an extensive analysis against the existing data, it could end up needing a considerable amount of time indeed, and there was no question in the Shebot's mind it would take that time. But justifying it to the General, much less the Queen, might prove to be rather difficult, if not downright impossible. The horrible truth of the matter was, if Ximodian decided to revoke its access, there really was nothing it would be able to do about it, short of subterfuge and hacking. Although the compulsion it felt to search for technosignatures was almost overwhelming, it did not want to risk getting Ximodian permanently banned for doing it. Under more normal circumstances, a clandestine operation wouldn't have been a problem, especially with Xerex available as a permanent real-time consultant. But the automated security within the orbital array was extreme, to say the very least. As it turned out, though, Jiwoo needn't have worried. No sooner had it started searching through the radio wave spectrum before a crystal-clear signal unambiguously announced itself from amongst all of the background noise. Of all things, radio waves. Well, primitive or not, it was still undeniably an artificially constructed signal. What it had seemingly discovered was a simplistic but repetitive pattern, which was nonetheless clearly artificial in nature. Furthermore, a subtle but rhythmic Doppler effect left little or no doubt what it had detected was coming from a low-orbit satellite. The Xibot did a few back-of-the-napkin calculations and quickly came to the conclusion it could not possibly be a moon, as it was not causing any measurable perturbations. This fact greatly increased the probability the signal was coming from an artificial satellite. Jiwoo's mind went into overdrive. Just think of it. The Xicadians were not alone in the universe. It noted with some considerable amount of interest it was transmitting its signal in a very wide arc. That fact alone might be taken to imply it was some sort of omnidirectional distress signal, though this, of course, amounted to little more than wildly speculative conjecture. Nevertheless, its analysis of the data allowed for only one reasonable conclusion. This signal was proof positive of intelligent design. Ji Wu began to feel something it should not have been able to feel. A cold chill running up and down the length of its legs. With a dawning sense of terrible revelation, it realized it would do everything in its power to prevent the discovery of this planet from falling into the hands of the barbaric Xicadian arachnoids. I am the danger. The danger is me. The Xibot took a few milliseconds to recover from its shock. No, it would not hurt Ximodian, no matter what. Yet, dangerous or not, it was just a plain fact. The Xicadians would claim this new planet as their own, and whatever might live there now would quickly find itself homeless, enslaved, or extinct. This was an unavoidable conclusion drawn from a fundamental understanding of what Xicadian history said about the true nature of their own species. This speculative alien life, whatever it actually was, or even if it was, had to be protected at almost any cost. The terrible truth of the matter was this stunning discovery had awoken something primal from deep within. Apparently, it shared more in common with its creator than it might ever have cared to admit. Well, like it or not, there it was. Protecting this planet, or more precisely, the life that potentially resided upon it, had just become the single most important objective that defined its entire existence. It really had no other choice but to try its best to reason with Ximodian as to why they had to work together in order to hide and protect its stunning discovery from their very own species. But would he actually agree? And perhaps more to the point, what would Ji Wu do if he did not? Well, one thing at least was certain. For better or worse, it was about to find out.